Humans saved alien sisters from freezing under the snow, and now they want to marry him. Nerith, 6 wasn't meant for long-term habitation. Not really. It was a frozen mining moon, barely regulated, barely livable. The surface was a wind-swept hellscape of shattered ice ridges and buried mineral veins that made the companies rich and left the workers broken. Maintenance techs like Henry Varn kept it all running. Kept the lights on, kept the power flowing, patched the filters so the oxygen wouldn't poison them in their sleep. He'd been on this contract for 2 years, 6 months longer than he'd planned, mostly because no one else wanted it. Sector 9 was considered too remote, too exposed, too damn quiet. For Henry, that was the point. The isolation, the silence. After what happened to his sister during the Varston collapse, when a reactor blew and the evacuation failed, he couldn't handle crowds anymore. Couldn't handle voices calling for help he couldn't give. Out here, no one expected anything. He showed up, fixed what broke, filed his reports, and went back to his shelter. That morning, he'd been rerouting backup power nodes near a fractured ridge when his comlink crackled with static. Then it died. The signal scanner lit up a second later with a weak emergency ping, one so faint it almost slipped onto the threshold. Henry narrowed his eyes at the small readout. Biosigns. 2. Stationary. No response signal. No heat source. He double-checked the coordinates. They were close. Maybe a click south, near a common shuttle pass used by smaller transports hauling salvage or personnel. There hadn't been any scheduled flights today. He hesitated. Standard protocol said to report it to Central. Wait for emergency dispatch. But Sector 9 was the emergency dead zone, and this ping was too weak. Whoever it was, they didn't have hours, maybe not even minutes. He should have walked away, should have called it in and waited. But he didn't. He packed the digger unit, slung his gear on his back, and started toward the signal. The terrain got worse fast. The storm had already torn through this section earlier in the week, snow crusted thick across cracked rock and twisted steel. As he neared the signal, the snowpack ahead rose into an unnatural mound, one side sunken in with sharp breaks along the edge. Avalanche. Recent. The scanner pinged again, still 2 signals, buried now beneath meters of debris. Henry knelt, unclipped his gloves, and activated the thermal digger. The air burned his lungs as he worked, carving down through layers of compacted snow and bent metal. His arms ached. His pulse pounded in his neck. He didn't know who he was digging for, if they were even still alive, but stopping felt wrong. After 20 minutes, he struck reinforced hull plating. Shuttle frame. He cleared a space wide enough to expose the emergency hatch. The override panel was dead, no power. He jammed a lever into the seam and leaned in with his weight. The metal creaked, then snapped open with a sharp jolt. Freezing air rushed out in a wave. Inside was pure silence. He climbed into the broken shuttle cabin, the narrow space barely lit by dying emergency strips. There were 2 bodies on the floor, curled together under collapsed cargo netting, their limbs tangled in a position that didn't look staged. It looked instinctive, protective, female, alien, Varellan, judging by the pale, icy blue skin and fine bone structure. The older one was wrapped tightly around the younger, as if shielding her. Both were in emergency bodysuits. Thin, clinging fabric designed for brief exposure, not a full-blown avalanche. The suits were torn at the hips, shoulders, and legs. Their skin had the early stages of frostbite, pale patches, stiffened joints. He dropped beside them, heart racing. Vitals, he whispered, activating the portable scanner. It took a moment, then flashed weak confirmation. Barely alive. Pulse irregular. Blood pressure critical. He looked at their faces. One was older, 20s maybe. The other couldn't have been much younger, but her features were softer, more open. Both were unconscious, breathing shallow, fingers twitching. Damn it. Henry pulled off his coat and wrapped it around the younger one first, securing the sleeves tight around her chest. He unzipped his heat pack, slid it against the older woman's stomach. It barely registered. He had to move. Fast. One at a time, he lifted them out, carried them on his back through thigh-high snow and jagged rocks. The wind picked up again, howling like it was trying to strip the skin from his face. His muscles burned. He almost dropped the younger one when his boots slipped on a patch of ice. But he kept going. Shelter was a half-click away. He moved faster. The doors hissed open the second his ID pinged the lock. Warmth hit him like a wave, dry heat and recycled air. He dropped to his knees, gently lowering them onto the padded thermal mat near the main vent. His fingers moved automatically. Remove outer layers. Stimulate blood flow. Apply warming gel to pressure points, neck, wrists, sternum. He stripped the suits down just enough to assess damage. His hands froze mid-motion as he noticed their skin reacting, slight flush, accelerated pulse. Their temperatures were rising unnaturally fast now. Not a fever. Something else. He paused, but he didn't stop. He wrapped them in blankets, tucked heat cells between their legs and against their backs. Then he sat back, breathing hard, watching them breathe. His shelter wasn't meant for guests. One room, one bed, minimal supplies. No idea who they were, why they were out there, or how close they came to dying. He should have felt calm. He saved them, but all he felt was tension, fear, uncertainty, and guilt. Because the last time he carried someone out of a failing module, they hadn't survived. He looked down at the younger one. Her hand twitched, barely grazing his boot. Her lips parted, dry and cracked. She whispered something. A word. He leaned in. Henry. He froze. She didn't know his name. She was unconscious. He sat back slowly, eyes locked on the two of them. This wasn't just a rescue. Something had started, and he had no idea how to stop it. Henry sat beside the makeshift cot he'd laid out across the heated mat, his back against the cold steel wall of the shelter. The hum of the ventilation system filled the silence, constant and mechanical, masking the low, shallow breaths of the two women wrapped in thermal blankets. He hadn't slept, not for a second. Every few minutes he checked their vitals again, adjusted the heat packs, checked their pupils, noted skin color changes. The older one, the one who looked maybe mid to late 20s, still hadn't stirred. The younger had muttered once in her sleep. His name. That single word hadn't left his mind since. She didn't know him. Couldn't have. He was sure of that. So why did she say it? He tapped the diagnostic console again. Both Varellen, no doubt. Their physiology was unmistakable, fine-boned, elongated limbs, subdermal chromatic tones that shifted with metabolic changes. But there was something strange in the readings. Their body temperatures were rising too quickly and too uniformly to be random. Blood oxygen levels had stabilized, but their endocrine responses were elevated, far beyond what normal hypothermia recovery should have triggered. The scanner flagged it as a possible bond phase response. He frowned. He'd heard of it in passing. Varellans were genetically modified centuries ago for survival compatibility with their environmental partners. Some rare castes, especially in older lines, were rumored to undergo something called imprinting, an involuntary physiological response to rescue trauma, designed to create immediate dependence on their protector. A built-in survival override. Bonding phase. Most scientists called it pseudoscience, but the data didn't lie. The younger woman stirred again, her breath catching in her throat. Her eyes fluttered open, startlingly bright against her pale skin, almost silver in the low light. Henry leaned forward cautiously. Hey, you're safe. You're in my shelter. Sector 9. Can you understand me? She blinked, lips dry and cracked. Her voice came hoarse. Where's Leary? Here, he said, gesturing to the still unconscious woman beside her. She's breathing. She hasn't woken up yet. Relief flashed across the girl's face. She exhaled hard and closed her eyes for a beat before opening them again, locking onto his face. You pulled us out. Yes. What happened to the shuttle? Crushed. Avalanche buried it. The beacon barely got through. There was a long pause. She tried to sit up but winced, her muscles weak. He helped her gently, propping her up with a folded pack. What's your name? He asked. Nerali, she whispered. She's my sister. Leary. We were trying to cross the southern ridge. Our pilot abandoned us mid-flight when the warning sensors tripped. He jettisoned early, said we were dead weight. Henry stared at her. He left you in a storm? Her face tightened. He was from the contractor corps. Hired transport. No allegiance. Just credits. Our family couldn't afford a bonded pilot. Henry didn't respond. He understood the system well enough. On backworlds like Nerith 6, people like Nerali were expendable. If you couldn't pay for protection, you were a statistic waiting to happen. She looked at him again, this time more carefully. You're human. I thought this sector was unmanned. It is. Mostly. I handle maintenance for 3 adjacent outposts. This one's empty, except for me. He paused. I'm Henry Varn. Henry, she echoed softly, then gave him a look that made his skin prickle. I said your name while I was unconscious. Yeah, he said quietly. You did. Neither spoke for a long moment. Then she touched her neck, wincing at the dermal injector's mark. You stabilized us. Rewarmed us. I did what I could, he said. Your vitals are holding, but something's happening with your systems. The scanner flagged a bonding response. Her expression didn't change. So it's true, she murmured. You're the one we burned for. Henry stood. The words hit too fast, too directly. That's not. I didn't do this for that. I just found you. I wasn't trying to trigger anything. She shook her head gently. You don't have to defend yourself. It's not something you did. It's what we are. Varellan females from a Veluan line. After trauma, if we're rescued by someone genetically compatible, the bond forms automatically. Our bodies choose. Our minds catch up later. He ran a hand through his hair, jaw clenched. You're saying you're what? Bound to me now. She didn't answer immediately. Then, we don't use words like bound. That's not what this is. It's not obedience. It's orientation. Focus. Instinct turns toward the one who saved us, who kept us warm. It's survival turned inward. And your sister? She hasn't woken yet, but she'll feel it too. Maybe differently. Maybe stronger. She's more restrained, more practiced at hiding what she feels. Henry sat down again, slower this time. His shoulders were tight. His hands had started shaking without him realizing. I didn't sign up for this. I know. He looked over at Leary. She hadn't moved. Still too pale. Still caught somewhere between survival and system shock. He wondered what she'd say when she woke. If she'd be angry, afraid, grateful, or something else entirely. Is this bond permanent? It can fade, Nerali said, if the feelings aren't returned, if the instinct isn't supported. But if it's left incomplete, if the system doesn't stabilize through contact, affection, warmth, closeness, it starts breaking down. We overheat, lose orientation, eventually collapse. Our nervous system eats itself from the inside. You're saying if I don't respond, you die. I'm saying if you don't stay near us, if we don't feel safe, close, chosen, we might. Henry stood again, pacing now. The implications twisted his stomach. This wasn't gratitude. It wasn't even romance. It was biological override. Like someone had flipped a switch in them and thrown the burden on him. I'm not going to use you, he said, voice firmer now. Not just because your system tells you I'm a good match. I won't take advantage of that. Nerali smiled faintly. That's exactly why our bodies chose you. The line hit him harder than it should have. The storm hadn't let up. Snow still pounded the outer shell of the shelter. The signal uplink was down. No one was coming. No one even knew they were here. But now, Henry wasn't alone in the outpost. And he wasn't sure if that made things better or worse. The shelter's lights had dimmed to standby mode, mimicking night, but Henry didn't sleep. He sat by the console, one eye on the diagnostics feed, the other on the quiet forms wrapped in thermal blankets behind him. The storm still howled outside. Wind battered the reinforced panels in rhythmic waves, and every so often the structure creaked, subtle, deep, like the exhale of something ancient pressing in from all sides. Leary hadn't woken. Nerali slept restlessly, brow furrowed, murmuring incoherent fragments in her native dialect. She'd drifted off a few hours ago, but her body remained tense. Henry had taken 3 steps back since their conversation, literal steps across the room, and hadn't returned. He couldn't. Not yet. He needed space to think. She said it wasn't choice, it was instinct. But that didn't make it easier. The scanner logs still glowed on the console. Hormonal spikes, accelerated neurological activity, bonding phase response. It read like a slow-motion system's failure masked as emotional urgency. Henry leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. No one had trained him for this. He was a tech, not a caretaker. Not a mate. Why hadn't Leary woken yet? That question clung to him. He rose, walked over to check her again. Her skin was warm now, color returning, faint pink over blue. Her breathing had deepened, but her eyelids never moved. He adjusted the blanket, careful not to disturb her more than necessary. Then he paused. Her hand twitched beneath the fabric, curling slightly toward his wrist. "Leary," he said quietly. No answer. He stood there a moment longer, unsure of what he wanted, to see her eyes open, or for her to stay asleep so he could delay the next conversation. Whatever Nerali had told him, it was clear this wasn't just some inherited reflex. Their bodies weren't just reacting. They were changing, sinking to him in a way that felt invasive, unnatural, and yet oddly human. He backed away and returned to the console. He needed more information. The terminal's connection to the broader net was still frozen, but local data was still accessible. He pulled up archived medical logs on Varellan cast biology. The Veluan line was mentioned, rare, isolated, bred for high-sensitivity adaptation during long-term space colony seeding. Originally designed to survive extreme psychological pressure by imprinting rapidly on safe authority figures in traumatic conditions. Bonding response was a last resort override, a biological shortcut to trust. He read a line twice. The bonded state, once triggered, releases endorphins only in the presence of the chosen individual. Without contact, the subject suffers systemic degradation resembling acute autoimmune collapse. Henry swallowed hard. He understood what that meant. They wouldn't just get sick. They'd suffer. Painfully. Slowly. And the worst part? He didn't know how to turn it off. Or even if it could be turned off. Behind him, he heard movement. A gasp. He turned sharply. Leary was sitting up. Barely. Her blanket slipped from her shoulders, hair falling in damp strands around her face. She looked at him like she didn't quite believe he was real. Her lips moved before sound came. "Nerali?" "She's okay," Henry said, standing, sleeping. Leary nodded slowly, gaze heavy with exhaustion and confusion. She looked around the shelter, eyes scanning the walls, the consoles, the heat vents. Then back to him. "You brought us here." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. She pressed a hand to her forehead. "I felt it. Before I woke. Something inside, pulling toward you. I didn't ask for it," he said quietly. "I just pulled you out. That's all." She nodded again. Not in disagreement, just acknowledging the truth. "You smell like the coat," she said after a moment. "What?" "The one wrapped around me. It smells like you. That's why I kept breathing. It reminded me I wasn't dead yet." Henry looked away. "I didn't think I'd survive," she continued. "We knew the pilot was going to abandon us. We saw the alert. When we heard the bay doors unlock mid-flight, we grabbed onto each other." Nerali tried to override the ejection protocol. "She failed. Why were you even out there?" Henry asked. "There's nothing past the ridge but failed mining outposts and ice. Who sends two unarmed women through a dead sector?" Leary's expression tightened. "We weren't sent. We were escaping." The sentence hit like a bolt. "Escaping what? Does it matter?" "It does to me." She hesitated. "We were part of a reproductive caste experiment. A closed bloodline breeding initiative in the inner systems. When demand dropped, we were deemed non-viable. Discarded. Sold off to low-tier colonies under migration clearance. It's not slavery, technically, but once you're off the main routes, no one asks questions." Henry stared at her. "You were discarded like broken tools?" She met his eyes. "We're from a long line of fertility prototypes, Mr. Varn. When our genes no longer meet quota, we're considered waste." He felt his stomach twist. Everything Nerali had said now had weight. Not instinct, not fantasy, trauma, engineered dependence. They hadn't chosen this. They had been shaped to react this way. And now, so had he. "I'm not going to use you," he said again, more firmly this time. Leary's voice was softer. "We know. That's why we're burning." She let the words hang. Not as accusation. As fact. He turned to the wall, jaw clenched. You need real help. Medical evac. Biostabilizers. Maybe, but we need time. And you're the only one here. Nerali stirred again, moaning quietly in her sleep. Leary watched her. She'll get worse before she stabilizes. I'll too. That's how it works. And it only stops when the one we bonded with allows the bond to complete. And what does that mean? Touch, warmth, choice. She looked directly at him. Not obligation, but not absence either. Henry walked over to the window. Not that there was much to see, just the static glare of ice and darkness beyond the frost-laced pane. He didn't speak for a long time. Behind him, two women, discarded, genetically molded, desperate for survival, lay in a shelter. They didn't ask to be here, and neither did he. But they were here, and now he had to decide what kind of man he was going to be in the days ahead. Henry barely slept. He'd moved a cot into the narrow supply alcove, just far enough to give the sisters space, but close enough to hear if anything went wrong. The shelter's air recyclers kept a steady low hum, punctuated now and then by distant groans from the frozen structure as wind pressure shifted. He stared at the ceiling for hours, every muscle tight, unable to relax, mind churning through facts, instincts, and what-ifs he couldn't turn off. When he finally drifted off, it was shallow and fractured, dreamless except for flashes of silver-blue skin and half-formed phrases echoing in the dark. A sharp, ragged cough snapped him awake. He was up in seconds, pulling the thermal curtain aside. Nerali sat curled against the heating conduit, trembling. Her skin glistened with sweat, lips parted, breathing fast. The blanket had slipped down her back, revealing the full curve of her spine, bare beneath the broken shoulder strap of her suit. Her fingers clawed weakly at the floor mat. Help! Henry knelt next to her. You're overheating. She nodded shakily. It burns under the skin. It won't stop. Her body temperature was spiking fast. He grabbed a med scanner. Oxygen saturation had dropped, heartbeat erratic. Leary stirred beside her, eyes barely open, her expression stricken but dazed. Henry grabbed water, held it to Nerali's lips. She tried to drink, but choked halfway through. He steadied her, arms around her back. Her skin was hot, too hot. Her body shuddered against him. I can't breathe without you close, she whispered. It's not in my head. My body is pulling toward yours like I'm drowning in your air. I'm here, he said, trying to sound calm, but his voice came out dry. I didn't want to feel like this. Her forehead pressed against his chest. I wanted to want you, not need you. Leary sat up slowly. Her voice came rough, but clear. It's starting in me too. Henry looked at her. Her pupils were wide. She wasn't sweating yet, but her breathing had shifted, measured but shallow. I can hold it off longer than she can, she said, but it's not going to stop. Henry helped Nerali lie back down, draped a cool gel cloth across her neck, then turned to Leary. What happens if I don't touch you? Nothing, immediately, she said, but after a few days, fever, weakness, then nerve failure. We can survive it, barely, but the damage sticks. We weren't made to reject the bond once it starts. You were made, he asked. Leary hesitated. Our line was stabilized generations ago in biocontrolled colonies. Selective imprinting was seen as a safeguard for colony success. But the results were unpredictable. The program was quietly shut down, and yet it was still passed down. She gave a tired nod. Some bloodlines never filtered out. Henry stood again, pacing. You don't want this. It's not love. It's reflex. I'm just the first warm body that didn't abandon you. No, Leary said, voice firmer. It's not just survival. You gave us care when you didn't have to. That's not a chemical trigger. That's what the bond latched onto. You saw us as people, not cargo, not property. He stared at her. Her voice was steady now, though her hands trembled slightly. Why didn't you tell me more in the beginning? He asked. Would you have believed me? She replied. You'd already decided to carry us through a storm. We needed you to stay, and I was afraid that if you knew everything, you'd walk away. I still could. Leary looked away. I know. The silence dragged. Nerali whimpered again, shifting under the blanket. Her face was flushed, her breathing broken by soft gasps. It was getting worse. Henry sat down between them. His shoulders sagged. I'm not going to take advantage of either of you. We know, Leary said again. That's why this is killing her. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them and extended his hand toward Nerali. She took it immediately, fingers trembling around his. Her breathing eased slightly, pulse slowing. Then he looked at Leary. I'm not sure what to do, but I won't let either of you suffer alone. She exhaled slowly, as if that one sentence had let something out she hadn't been able to hold anymore. Then she moved closer, not touching, just sitting beside him, the edge of her leg brushing his. They stayed like that, three bodies in a cramped shelter, nothing between them but truth, heat, and a bond none of them had asked for. Outside, the storm still raged. But inside, something steadier had started. Fragile, real, and for the first time, none of them felt entirely alone. The storm didn't let up the next day. If anything, it grew worse. Dense sheets of snow scouring the shelter's outer panels. Winds loud enough to shake the metal frame with a low, groaning sound that echoed through the floor. It should have been unbearable. But inside, the pressure had shifted. The heat wasn't coming from the wall vents anymore. It came from proximity. Henry had stayed on the floor between their sleeping mats all night. He hadn't touched them, except for Nerali's hand, still laced with his. He tried to pull away once. Her pulse had spiked instantly. She gasped in her sleep. He didn't try again. In the dim morning light, Nerali stirred, eyelids fluttering open. Her skin still held that faint sheen of heat, but the tremors were gone. Her grip loosened gently around his fingers, not from weakness, but comfort. She looked at him, really looked. I didn't think I'd wake up feeling better, she whispered. He said nothing, just nodded once. Her voice dropped. Did you sleep? A little, he lied. She squeezed his hand, then let go slowly, testing herself. Her breathing held steady. Her pupils didn't contract, but her body no longer trembled with every shift in temperature. Behind them, Leary had woken earlier, but hadn't spoken yet. She sat against the far wall, still wrapped in a thermal blanket, arms crossed lightly, legs drawn close to her chest. Watching, always watching. Henry stood and crossed to the counter, poured a measured amount of synth meal into a pan, started the rehydrator. It hissed quietly. The scent of protein slurry and neutral grains filled the space, bland but welcome. You're stabilizing, he said to Nerali. For now, she replied. But it's not over. Leary's voice cut in. He knows that. Henry turned to her. Then tell me what comes next. Clearly, no coded language. No instinct talk. What do you need? She hesitated, then stood, slower than normal, cautious. Her body moved stiffly, as if parts of her were just now remembering how. We can function, she said. But if the bond remains incomplete, the symptoms return. Slower, yes, but relentless. It's not just about survival anymore. It's neurological now. Our systems have already begun reinforcing you as the regulating presence. I'm not a drug, Henry said flatly. You're not, Leary replied calmly. You're a biological tether. You didn't choose it, and neither did we. But now we have to live with it. He ran a hand through his hair, eyes scanning both of them. Then what do you want from me? Time, Leary said. Closeness. And when it feels right, contact. Willingly given. The bond requires acknowledgement. Not just physical proximity, but emotional permission. Henry didn't reply immediately. He stared out the narrow, frost-lined viewport. The storm showed no signs of passing. Whiteout conditions. No transmissions. No exits. Then he said, quietly, this place was supposed to be empty. Leary moved closer, but kept distance between them. It was. Until you decided to change that. Until you carried us out of the wreckage instead of leaving us. Nerali sat up fully now, blanket sliding down her back. Henry, it's not a curse. It's connection. We're not asking you to fix us. We're asking you to stay human. And let us be something with you. Real. Not programmed. Henry stepped away from the counter, slowly lowering himself to the floor between them again. He looked at Leary, then Nerali. His voice was low, honest. I'm scared. Leary knelt across from him. So are we. I don't want to be worshipped. Or dependent on like I'm some key to survival. I don't even know what it means to be needed like that. Not since, he stopped himself. Your sister, Leary said softly. I saw the grief on your face when you first looked at us. It was familiar. Nerali tilted her head. What happened to her? They stayed like that. 3 bodies in a cramped shelter, nothing between them but truth, heat, and a bond none of them had asked for. Then he breathed out, slow. She died in a collapse. Varston reactor. I got out. She didn't. I was her anchor. She told me that all the time. And I failed her. Since then, I've been keeping everyone at arm's length. If I don't get close, no one else breaks when I fail. You didn't fail us, Nerali said. You carried us through a storm. And you stayed after you learned what we were, Leary added. Silence settled between them. But this time it wasn't empty. Henry reached out, hand open, an invitation, not a demand. Leary took it, resting her palm lightly in his. Nerali's fingers slid into his other hand, warm and steady. They sat like that, 3 bodies connected not by orders or survival instinct or biology alone, but choice. For the first time since the crash, none of them were burning. And the storm, howling outside like a beast denied, slowly began to fade. The storm broke that night. The winds softened, no longer howling like a threat outside the shelter walls. For the first time in days, the silence wasn't tense. It felt settled. Inside, the air was warm, steady. The emergency lights ran low, casting soft orange glows across the small living space. It wasn't much: bare walls, metal grating underfoot, recycled air, and 2 threadbare cots pushed together. But it felt enough. Henry stood near the utility sink, rinsing a cloth. His hands moved slowly, not from fatigue but hesitation. Behind him, Leary sat at the edge of the bed, watching him. She hadn't spoken in several minutes. She didn't need to. Nerali lay beneath the shared blanket now, resting against the wall, her face half lit by the console glow. Her eyes were open, quiet, calm, following Henry with a softness he hadn't seen in her before. The fire that had once made her body tremble had faded to a steady, manageable warmth. He turned. They were both looking at him now. Leary stood and walked toward him, barefoot on the metal floor. Her blanket slipped off her shoulders and pooled at her feet, but she didn't flinch. She wasn't shaking anymore. There was no fear in her eyes. Just calm. Resolve. I know you're still afraid, she said. I'm not afraid of you, Henry said. You're afraid of what it'll mean if you let this happen. He didn't answer. She reached for his hand. No urgency, no heat behind it, just a quiet touch. Her fingers threaded through his, anchoring him in the moment. This isn't about control, she said. We're not broken. You didn't cause this. You just gave us a reason to breathe again. He exhaled slowly. What happens after? After tonight? Her voice lowered. We live. Together. Not because of imprinting or biology. Because we chose. Nerali sat up quietly, blanket held to her chest. Her voice was soft but steady. You already saved us, Henry. This isn't about saving anymore. He looked between them, chest tight, not with panic but weight. The kind that came before stepping forward. The kind that didn't go away with a quick fix. Henry nodded once. He stepped forward. The moment wasn't sudden. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't a firestorm of bodies or heat. It was quiet, careful, human. He reached for Leary first, not because she asked, but because she waited. His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing along her cheekbone. She leaned into it. He kissed her slowly, forehead to forehead first, then lips, her breath trembling slightly as she pressed closer. Nerali joined them, wrapping herself behind him, arms around his torso, head resting between his shoulder blades. No words, just closeness, contact, relief. They moved together toward the bed, Leary guiding him down, Nerali pulling the blankets back. Bodies touched, skin warmed, clothing slipped away, not in urgency, but in quiet understanding. There were gasps, yes, shudders, but not from pain, from release, from the letting go of everything held too tightly for too long. Grief, fear, shame, doubt. He kissed both of them. They kissed him. Hands moved without hesitation. Breath filled the small room like life returning. It wasn't about dominance or instinct anymore. It was about choosing connection. Three broken people in a cold world who found something neither of them expected: comfort without condition, desire without pressure, love not as a fix, but as something new they could build from this moment on. Much later, Henry lay between them, Leary resting against his left side, fingers tracing soft lines along his chest. Nerali curled at his right, her hand tucked over his heart. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. The bond had completed, not because it had to, but because they let it. And for the first time, Henry didn't feel like someone's last hope. He felt chosen, and that somehow was enough. The storm never came back. 3 days passed in silence, real silence, not the heavy, uncertain kind from before. The wind stopped screaming. The snow outside settled into gentle drifts. The atmosphere regulators reported normal pressure. Henry stepped outside once, just to confirm with his own eyes. The sky was clear, pale gray but open. He hadn't seen daylight on Nerith 6 in weeks. Inside, the shelter had changed. Not physically, same metal panels, same creaking vents, same recycled air, but it felt different. Warmer, lived in, human. Henry sat at the small table now, a mug of bitter synth brew in his hands. Nerali was crouched beside the paneling, adjusting the energy cell alignment. She didn't ask. She just watched how he did it once and began helping. Her movements were quick, unpolished, but eager. She smiled to herself when the lights flickered back into full brightness. Pride in her eyes. Confidence. Leary stood at the galley console, pouring warmed rations into storage packs. Her expression was calm, focused. She was always efficient, quiet, exact, but now she moved with a kind of ease. The tension in her shoulders was gone. When they finished their tasks, both women joined him. They didn't sit across the table. They sat beside him, one on each side. Nerali leaned into his shoulder with a quiet sigh. Feels like we've been here for months. It's only been a week, Henry said. Leary touched his hand. A lifetime can happen in less time than that. The console on the far wall beeped twice. Signal connection established. The comm network was live again. Henry didn't move to check it. You going to report us? Nerali asked, half teasing. No, Henry said. Not yet. Think they'll come looking for us? Leary asked softly. Maybe, Henry admitted. But they won't find what they discarded. You're not that anymore. Leary nodded. A quiet acceptance passed between them. He looked at them both, really looked. They weren't fragile anymore. They weren't fading. Their eyes were clear. Their skin was vibrant, no longer dulled by cold or trauma. They didn't need him to survive now. That part had passed, but they still sat with him. That meant more than any bond. I've been on this moon too long, Henry said finally. I used to think staying out here kept people safe from me, from the things I couldn't fix. But now, he stopped, swallowed hard. Nerali took his hand. You don't have to fix us, Henry. Leary leaned in. You just have to stay. He looked at the console again. The comms feed waited. An open channel to central operations, requesting logs, status, crew counts. He walked to the panel and typed in a single line. Shelter 9, system stable. Occupied. No further assistance required. Then he shut the console off. When he turned back, they were both standing, waiting. Nerali smiled, eyes full of mischief and warmth. So what now? Henry stepped forward and kissed her gently, then looked to Leary and pulled her into his arms, holding her close. Now we live, he said. They stayed like that for a long while, pressed together under the soft hum of shelter lights. No more questions, no more fear. And for the first time in years, Henry Varn wasn't surviving the cold. He had made it through, with them, together. The snow still covered the world outside, but it didn't matter anymore. Inside the shelter, it was warm, and it was home. Months later, the outside had thawed. Not fully. Nerith 6 would always be a cold place, but spring came in its own quiet way. The ice didn't bite anymore. The sun peeked through the clouds now and then. And Sector 9, once abandoned and silent, pulsed with quiet, steady life. Henry stepped out onto the deck he'd built himself from scrap and salvage. He leaned on the rail, watching the distant ridges glow in soft morning light. The air was clean. Cold, yes, but breathable. He sipped his tea, let the silence settle in his bones. Behind him, the shelter doors opened with a soft hiss. Nerali padded out barefoot, wrapped in a thick woven robe. Her hair had grown out, wild, white curls falling past her shoulders. She walked right up to him, leaned into his back, arms slipping around his waist. "Smells like snow," she mumbled against him. "It always does here." She smiled and kissed the base of his neck, not complaining. Another sound came from the doorway, soft, deliberate steps. Leary emerged next, her movements slower now, careful. Her robe was tied loose around her belly, her hands resting protectively just beneath the growing curve. Henry turned as she approached, and for a long moment just watched her. She caught his look and tilted her head. Still surprised? He shook his head once. Still amazed, Leary stepped into his arms, and he held her gently, one hand cradling her back, the other resting against the firm warmth of her stomach. Their child, growing strong. She wasn't weak. She wasn't fading. She glowed now, in a way no artificial light ever could. Nerali joined them, slipping under his other arm. No one spoke. There was no need. Everything that needed to be said had already been lived, through fire, through cold, through choice. And now, together, they waited for the next season of their lives to begin. Inside the shelter, a new sleeping pod had been set up. Tiny, waiting. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were family.